Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thanks for being so prompt and on time. This is Sound Walk Stories Sunday. It's all about writers, and I'll be letting a few people in, so I'll be a bit sort of disjointed at 1 minute, and next minute hopefully I'll be in the flow soon, he says. Anyway, so I'm Andrew Stuck. I'm one of the co-producers of Soundwalk September, and also of Walk, Listen, Create, which is the platform that hosts Soundwalk September. And the authors who are congregating today are all shortlisted in an anthology, which is aptly called Walking Home. Now, they were drawn from a competition which we ran. I think we did it at the beginning of December, actually. We started the competition and ran into the new year. And we had over 100 entries, and we had 4 volunteer judges who were Anita Roy, Kerry Andrews, Simon Piasecki, and Lydia Kennaway, who you'll hear from in a minute. What those volunteers had to do was they had to work their way through all 100 and score them, and they created a long list of sort of top 24, and we're down to the short list. And what will happen at the end of this event is that 2 of these writers in the room will take on the mantle of writer in residence for 22-23 for Walk, Listen, Create. Now, our current writer in residence, one of them, Lydia Kennaway, also acted as a judge. So I'm going to be inviting Jake Morris Campbell to introduce her, but first I'd like to introduce you to Jake. Jake Morris Campbell is a poet, broadcaster, critic and tutor. He was born in South Shields in 1988 and is the author of the RSL Ondaatje prize long-listed collection Corrigenda for Costa Fine Town, which is published by Blue Dido Press. He completed a PhD in creative writing at Newcastle University in 2019, is the author of 2 pamphlets of poetry, The Coast Will Wait Behind You, Art Editions North, and Definitions of Distance, Red Squirrel Press. Selected in 2021 as a BBC AHRC New Generation Thinker, he regularly appears on Radio 3 programmes including Free Thinking, Northern Drift and The Essay. Jake regularly collaborates with artists and creative practitioners on multidisciplinary projects. Recent commissions include a new poem for A Hut, A Byans, Bamborough Bones Heritage Fund, and a sound essay, The Spirit of, oh dear, you do test me here, Jake. What's that?
Antenokitticus, the native Geordie god on Hadrian's Wall.
Okay, made with composer Rob McKay for Sounds of Tyne as part of Radio 3's After Dark Festival at Sage Gateshead. So Jake, over to you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So my first duty is to introduce Lydia, actually, and of course to say thank you very much for having me. Just to let everybody who hasn't got a copy of this know that it's a fantastic looking publication. It's really beautiful and tactile, and I'm really looking forward, as I'm sure you all are, to hearing the authors read from or present their work. But first of all, I will introduce Lydia Kennaway. So Lydia Kennaway is our poet in residence. Lydia's debut pamphlet, A History of Walking, was published by Happenstance in 2019. And in the same year, she earned an MA in Writing Poetry from Newcastle University. Her work has appeared in 10 anthologies and in many magazines. Lydia won the Flambard Poetry Prize in 2017 and was commended in the 2020-2021 Magma Poetry Competition. She is Walk, Listen, Create's first poet in residence. So over to Lydia, who I think is going to give us a reading now.
Thanks, Jake, and thank you, Andrew, too. I've had a really wonderful year as poet in residence, and I'll tell you more about my project that I pursued in this role. I chose the theme of this competition, Walking Home, because at the time we were still very much sort of imbued with the pandemic, and walking really took on a new significance for so many people. And for me personally, it sort of literally grounded me at a time when so much was up in the air. And I also found that my walking ruminations turned to the idea of home. Many of us endured a geographical separation from loved ones during the pandemic, and my hopes were that the theme would really encourage a very broad interpretation, and I was very pleasantly surprised that that is exactly what happened. Anita Roy, my co-judge of the poems, she and I thoroughly enjoyed reading all the submissions, and we really enjoyed the poems that had an interesting narrative that then took a turn, an unexpected turn or a perspective that was surprising. We also enjoyed the ones that showed a real craft, paid attention not just to the look of the poem on the page, but the sound of the poem. I think there were a few poems that perhaps would have found a home in the other half of the competition, the sort of flash fiction side of the competition. You know, very interesting narratives. And there were many poems that didn't quite make it into the shortlist, but which nonetheless had lines that still stay with me. And I really hope that the writers of those poems will return to them and give their poems a bit of time and space. And I compare it to raising teenagers, sort of step back and see what they turn into. And it can be very surprising. It may not be the poem you thought it was going to be. So coming to the end of my residency, tomorrow night is the last episode of Footloose. And I don't know how many of you have been to these, but they've been monthly online events where I invite a guest poet to bring a poem that refers in some way to walking. And I then read a poem of my own from a history of walking. And we talk about the way that the two works intersect, or sometimes the way they don't. And tomorrow night, my guest is Helen Mort, and she is a wonderful poet and also a very able climber. And we are going to be talking about the clothes women wear when walking, and the effects and the expectations and the signifiers of the clothes they wear. And I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. I've been asked to read a poem. I'll keep it short. This is a history of walking. And each poem takes a different kind of walking and uses it really as a medium to explore different aspects of mostly love and loss and possession. So the poem I'll read is called The Invention of Walking. Feathers, tails, claws, fins and fur, antlers, paws and scales. These are your creations. Now you take a lump of clay in your big tired hands to make another. You are weary, but roll and pinch and roll the clay and start again. Out of habit, you make 4 limbs, stick them to a blob of body, add a head. Oh hell, not that again. But then you lift the 4 limbs, set the head so it doesn't hang, but balances tricky on a slender neck stem. For locomotion, it will stagger, shifting the weight from one hind leg to another, a constant fall and recover. With its forward-looking eyes, it can want. With spare limbs, it can carry, possess, and, being upright, it displays its sex, but doesn't know this yet. You make it to crave the having and dread the losing. You will teach it shame and blame Eve and a serpent and a tree, while its fate is to fall always, fall and recover, fall. Thank you.
That was so wonderful to hear that, Lydia. And the Footloose events that Lydia referred to, I was fortunate enough to take part in one of those a few months ago, and it was a real privilege to discuss poetry in such depth and detail with such an astute reader and personality as Lydia. So I think we can all agree that was lovely. And do check out that pamphlet. It's a wonderful pamphlet of poetry. I'm just going to read one poem, and then we'll get stuck into the main event, as it were. I don't want to kind of take up the focus, but doing the kind of the advertising. This is from Corrigenda for Costa Fine Town, which Andrew kindly mentioned. And Blue Diode Press up in Leith in Edinburgh put this out for me last year. And just for anyone who's sort of poetry aficionados, Rob Mackenzie there is curating a really interesting list of poets. So do check it out and check the press out. There's a lot of good stuff coming out of Leith there. The poem I'm going to read, just for the benefit, I'm aware this is a very international audience, and I'm coming to you from the northeast of England, and this poem, like some of the poems in my book, draw heavily on Geordie vernacular. And if you've never been to the northeast of England, this can be sort of quite impenetrable to the outside ear. So I don't want to kind of over-explain, but this poem is, I guess, all about having a voice and having a dialect, and what that means in relation to sort of received pronunciation and structures of power and class and privilege. It's called Akenside Syndrome, and just to explain that, there's an epigraph at the beginning from a guy called David John Douglas, who was a miner from Tyneside, who sort of spent most of his career in the Nottinghamshire coalfields. And he wrote a trilogy of memoirs, sort of all about mining and class and how that related to working class identities in the Northeast and in the Midlands and in South Wales. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from in the poem, just to kind of bring everyone up to speed. So apologies if it alienates anybody. Akenside Syndrome, or I should add, it's a villanelle as well. So famous example being Bill and Thomas, I guess. Do not go gentle into that good night, rage, rage against the dying of the light. So I've used the form of the villanelle to engage with this idea. Akenside Syndrome. My voice choosing whether it nahs or knows, while lost on campus looking for the hall. Geordie syllables caught in me throat. Repairman with faded anchor and swallow tattoos speaks a language my granda bawls, while I wonder what it is, I know. Puzzled, I ponder which way to gan or go, while he points, force on your left, nae bother at all. Geordie syllables free in his throat. Cleaners and canteen staff in the shadow of the academy don't need to call Geordie syllables caught in their throats. From the Robinson Library, I can see Gallowgate, thousands of accents that are heaven walls end, while my tongue stumbles, nah or no, Considering where my voice is at home, how a Tyneside accent can make us gold, tone over when it's right to nah or no, Geordie syllables caught in my throat. Thank you. I haven't done a Zoom reading in a while, so I've sort of forgot that silent applause. It's quite strange to a reader. We now move on to the first tranche of readings. And to get us going, I believe we have a video from Kim V. Goldsmith. What I'm going to do, though, for each of the authors is I'm going to read the biography that they've supplied. And then we'll kind of go into the readings, and in this case it's a video, I believe. Is that correct, Andrew?
Yeah, that's right, and I'll be sharing screen immediately after you've finished reading the intro.
Sure. Okay. So so Kim V. Goldsmith is an Australian-based artist and writer, exploring layers of nuance and complexity within the rural and regional territories in which she works.
Hello, my name is Kim Goldsmith, although you'll usually see my name written with my middle initial of V. I live just outside an inland regional city in New South Wales called Dubbo, on the lands of the Tubbergar people of the Wiradjuri Nation. Thank you for having me as part of Soundwalk September. It's a thrill to be part of this event, even though I can't be there in person. I've been a professional writer for about 30 years now, but I've only just started spending more time on my creative writing, and the chance to flex my creative wordsmithing muscle on the Walking Home competition came just at the right time for me. Over summer, I like to walk in the early mornings while it's cool, and last summer was a particularly mild summer in the central west of New South Wales, ending a second year of good rains after 3 years of severe drought. It provided enough warmth and moisture for things to really flourish again, providing hope for the year ahead. This piece was written about the day after a summer storm. It's called New Year's Day. New Year's Day breaks on the back of a night of furious rain from an angry, strobing sky, soaking the summer landscape to the core. It's a burnished gold and green morning on the city's bush fringe. A cool breeze becomes colder in the shade of statuesque box trees, arms stretching out from roadside footings, glittering and clacking high above me, showering spent leaves like confetti. My breath labours as I walk uphill past the neighbour's drive. The heavy bronze tops of kangaroo grass bend toward me in a mass of wattle saplings, dishevelled yellow paper daisies and thick stands of grass. Weeping, wheat, windmill, red, hairy panic and tussock all jam between fence and road. The scree of pink galahs and white cockatoos pierces the reverie, the caw of ravens somewhere distant. Last night's storm rearranged the dust, a clean slate for new tracks. Small birds, lizards, a goanna, kangaroos, and my factory-made soles imprinted in the spongy gravel. Our paths intersect on this day. A fallen cockatoo feather glows in the roadside grasses, golden in the morning light. Almost home, deeply saturated yellows, pinks and mauves draw me to look closer at the smooth, naked bellies of ornamental eucalypts shedding their skins. Rust-coloured rivulets of cypress pine needles drape the shoulders of the road. The warm, heady essence of lemon-scented gums wafts on cool air, carrying the amphibious cacophony of chirruping, barking and booming frogs in the gully by the house. I hope you enjoyed New Year's Day. All the best for the rest of Soundwalk September, and thank you again for having me.
Wow, I mean, for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere who are used to New Year's Day walks in sort of icy or miserable, drizzly conditions, that was really kind of transporting, I think. Sort of brought me to a whole new world. And I was really struck by Kim's imagery and sounds there. I'm sure you all were too. The names of those plants and bushes and animals were just really resonant. And these are just gifts to authors, whether in poetry or in prose. I thought it was a really rich reading from Kim there. So it was so lovely to have that video. Sending thanks on to Kim there. We are going to move next to Mark Goodwin, and we are going to hear some audio of Mark reading from his poem titled "I Did." I'm going to give Mark's biography, but I'm also going to give a little bit of an inspiration. Mark's asked if I could read the inspiration which informed his piece "I Did." So Mark Goodwin speaks and writes in various ways. He is also a walker, balancer, stroller, climber, and experiencer of place. Mark began poetry making decades ago. I love that phrase, poetry making. It's a really nice way of putting it, of making poetry. So Mark says about his piece, "Ever since my starting out to learn poetry making, I've been enthralled by the phenomenon of place. And as I progressed, I became fascinated by how, as embodied creatures, we are in place, and also how we express and navigate our being in and through place. Both my poetry books with Long Barrow Press, Steps and Rock as gloss, deal directly with mapping and navigation. And I Did is a continuation of such orientational concerns, but homes in on the complex and creased tension between and contained in journeying and dwelling." So I believe we've got an audio piece of...
I did not scrunch my paper map and press its creased mass into a crag's first crack near a pond at the bottom of a field one, nor did I hide such screwed up symbolism in an oak dresser's drawer, in some husk of home, and I certainly did not push such paper into my boot.
Wow, that's a really unusual reading of that poem. And for those of us who've seen it displayed on the page, Mark has sort of really disjointed the individual words and lines in the poem. So hearing it come to life in that way was really, really fantastic. I loved the idea of the scrunched up symbolism. I thought that's quite a witty sort of pun on quite often what we're doing as poets. And that line, "the husk of home," I think will have probably rung true with a lot of the authors who've been grappling with this big theme of walking home. So that was really, really nice to hear that. I think sometimes as poets we read too quickly as well, so it was really nice to hear that really sort of long, drawn out, kind of crackling almost effect of that reading. That was really lovely. So thanks to Mark for that audio. Okay, moving on to prose again next. We have Cheryl Markowski, and I hope I've pronounced your name correctly there, Cheryl. Apologies if I'm getting anybody's names or place names incorrectly pronounced. Cheryl Markowski walks in England and the Caribbean. Her words appear in Ellipsis Zine, New Flash Fiction Review, Urban Tree Festival, and Janus Literary. So over to Cheryl.
Thanks, Jake. I wrote this story. I decided I would try to bring back the walk that my great-grandmother made at the beginning of the 20th century from Silesia, a region that now lies mostly within Poland. And she walked all the way to the Crow's Nest Pass in the Canadian Rockies, where I grew up. And I realized this story now has more relevance with people fleeing from the Ukraine, which is very close to this area. So I imagine my great-grandmother navigating the perils of hunger, fast-flowing rivers, the dark forests, and also the loss of infants, which occurred. And I braided this with the theme of medicinal pine trees, which punctuated her life and mine, because we were always surrounded by pines, and they used the pines for various things. Right, walk of life. Freed woman, walk to pines and panic in the lower Silesian forest. Cross your heart and the Kavisa River, your pudgy arms wrap round your father's tree trunk neck. Chihaw, hush, child. Pull through on pine seeds that catch on a breeze and spread far from the parent tree. Full of vitamin B and surprisingly tasty when compared with the alternative, nothing. Must learn to walk before you run, he tells you. Forge a passport, forge a ticket, forge a new world life. Washerwoman. Walk up the aisle to pines and possibility in the Rockies. Across the ocean and the Crow's Nest Pass, your slender arms wrapped around your husband's branch line. Boil young male pine cones each spring. Add top of the cow's milk and he won't mind the crunch on teeth, the crunch decision, the crunch in his heart. Worship the ground he walks on, he insists. Scrub and scrape and scratch. Coal, dirt, a living. Madwoman. Sleepwalk to pines and parenthood in wood decay fungi. Into the woods to bury 1, 2, 3 in coffin dark. Your aching arms round the cleaved babies. Peel raw bark from your young twigs, unswaddling new growth, new wood, new tree ring. Excellent source of vitamin C when trying to survive. Crawl before you walk, you urge your new child. Face like a drying beet, born from pine needle tea. Walk home to the pines, the forests, the mountains. This is home. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Cheryl, for that wonderful reading there of Walk of Life. I think it's such a wonderful idea to kind of braid the personal with the historical in this way, and to be echoing your great-grandmother's footsteps on this, on what sounds like an epic journey, but here I think actually we get the really the sort of microcosmic details and the sort of everydayness of that. So it's sort of boiling down this huge scale thing into its component parts. And again, there was just so many striking lines and images in this. When you read about your husband's branch line, I think it was, that was such an unusual way of describing, you know, and kind of tying that imagery into this forest setting in such a neat way. It was really kind of, yeah, really expansive imagery. So that was really interesting. I'd love to see what happens with this next, to find the full journey recreated. That was wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so we go back to poetry again for the next reading, which comes from Marcel Newbold. Marcel's writing explores place and inheritance. Pushcart Prize nominated and winner of the poetry in the Arcades competition in 2020. Her poems have been published in online and in print. She is managing editor of Nightingale and Sparrow Literary Press and lives in Cardiff, Wales, where she trained as an architect. Over to Marcel then, please.
Hello, thank you very much, Jake, and thank you for having me here this evening, this afternoon, this evening. My poem is about the journey home with young ones, with little ones, which, as we often know, can be slow and prolonged, and maybe could be a type of pilgrimage, not the sort that many are privileged to kind of walk on the dales and miles, but a kind of mini pilgrimage every day. And so the poem deals with kind of that kind of timeless routine of kind of place and sound and locomotion. And it kind of has that, this poem has a connection that with the ancient. And I'd just like to thank again Alban Lowe for his illustrations. I had one directly opposite my poem, which when I saw it, I literally tears streamed on my face. It was so beautiful. So thank you again, Albion. That was so lovely to have next to my poem. Okay. Returning. The walk home was gentle that evening. Puddles jumped, brambles skirted, marble-sized stones a game. His apple crunch added to the music, the rhythmical drag third of his skip. The sparrows, they quietened after a strenuous day. The cries of distant school runs abated. A moon was full and sharp. Intermittent dim streetlights appeared as we emerged from the protecting lane. Once inside, front door slammed, muddied coat discarded, Velcro shoes removed, he came close and whispered, 1,000 years old. The tide's high tonight, the moon pulls it. The pirates will be out.
Gosh, thank you so much, Marcel. That ending of that poem was just so fantastic. I love that kind of imaginative, kind of deep time coming into play, and the kind of the playfulness of it as well. I just thought it was really excellent. I've got a 3-year-old son who started nursery last week, and we walk a short distance to his nursery, and I think you're right. It is a sort of a mini pilgrimage, really. One kind of braided with a lot of anxiety and yeah, carrying of things that you wouldn't necessarily need to carry on a walk otherwise. And I think all of that kind of came through in the poem. The marble-sized stones, you know, the way that these everyday items become charged, I think, through the vision of someone so small, and the way that you've captured that so beautifully in this lovely poem. And then that again, that end, and I'm just really struck by how you've kind of really zoomed out into this 1,000-year long view, and yeah, it's just wonderful. And you're right, the way it's laid out on the page with that illustration is just gorgeous, isn't it? So thanks so much, Marcel. That was a lovely read. So we have another poet next, Tony Horrocks, and I'll just give Tony's bio. Tony Horrocks has been writing poetry for many years, alongside a career in community theatre, educational drama, and theatre in education. He lives in Dorset. Over to Tony, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, I've got a lovely drawing illustration opposite my poem as well, which I was really pleased with. The poem's called Of Blood and Water. Just a little bit of background. It is actually about a walk I made a few years ago to Prague, but the walk also refers to my late father and uncle who came to England as refugees in 1939. Just before the Second World War, is both Jewish Czechs escaping from Nazism. And I sort of thought a lot about what it'd be like for them never going back afterwards. They never wanted to go back, and wondering about what that journey would be. And then finally, years later, making the journey myself with members of my family, and looking for my grandparents' gravestone in the new Jewish cemetery, and which was a very weird experience. It was really hard to find, and finally we discovered the gravestone was flat and was absolutely covered in ivy and leaves. So it took us a long time to sort of pull those away and literally bring the past to light. and obviously a very powerful moment. And that's that sense of traveling back in time and trying to make sense of the past is what the poem's about. Okay. Of blood and water. For 70 years, 5 English places he had called home. But within his hybrid blood flowed secret rivers, Vltava, Elbe, Oder, Morava. Names he could barely pronounce, but ingested in childhood. Those Sundays his father and uncle met, and goose fat dumplings with sweet vinegared cabbage evoked their birth language. And he, an uncomprehending ghost, sensed their sadness, wondering if they wanted to return home to Prague in search of their mother, lost in the Holocaust. They never did. Years later, he stepped off the train there, walking to find the city's new Jewish cemetery and the fallen family gravestone hidden beneath sprawling ivy. He fetched water, let it flow like a river washing clean a century's legacy of dirt. As he whispered, Vltava, Elbe, Oder, Morava, until his name at last appeared. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Tony, for that incredibly powerful and moving poem, which I think is an extremely fitting tribute to your ancestors. It felt like an incantation or a spell, really, towards the end. I thought the repeating of those wonderful phrases. And you're gonna have to forgive me, I can't remember who said this, but there's a quote which goes something like, "Place enters the blood with the milk." And I can't remember if it was someone like Richard maybe, or someone he was quoting anyway said that. And I was thinking about that, the way that place, and use that line, it becomes ingested in childhood. These names that he couldn't pronounce become ingested. The way that place kind of has an afterlife, and histories kind of can be recovered, but maybe not in the same way as history or archaeology would recover them. So this poetic recovery that you've managed here, I think, is really powerful. So thanks for that, Tony. I really enjoyed that. I think we've got, I'm checking a spreadsheet as I go, so apologies for the slightly slow transfer. Yes, we've got one more reading from Helen Harradine next. I'll just check. Helen, are you all right to read?
Yep, I'm good.
Great. Okay, I'll give Helen's bio, and then we'll hear from Helen, and then we have a short comfort break. So Helen Harradine is a writer living in the Scottish Borders. She writes novels and short stories, and her work has recently been shortlisted and commended. So over to Helen.
Thank you, Jake. Oh, it's absolutely awesome to be on this shortlist with you guys. It makes me quite nervous to do a reading now, but thank you for having me. It's great to be part of Soundwalk September. My piece, The Scholar's Path, was inspired by a real pathway on the Isle of Harris in the Outer Hebrides, where children used to walk to and from school every morning and evening. It's an absolutely incredible part of the Hebridean Way that I hiked back in 2019. And we got there just as this particular part, just as the sun was setting. So yeah, this piece is inspired particularly by the children walking to and from school. The Scholar's Path. The sun is setting, and this means we only have an hour to go until last light. I can get us back, as I've been walking this route since I was a bairn, and even a thick haar wouldn't scare me. The start of this path isn't obvious, but there are way markers for those boys and girls who know where to look. It's a tangled rocky landscape, and the misshapen stones loom large and frequent. As we ascend, we pass below a crag and climb until we can look back and see a view of our school. The sun is beginning to play peekaboo behind the mountains, its bright orange rays turning the sky to fire and brimstone. As the eldest, I link arms with wee Margaret and John. I practically drag them home every day, but the twins need special attention, otherwise they are apt to go running off into the hills and get lost. I know because I'm the one that has to stay out in the dark, damp, cold and find them when they do go missing. We cheerfully say hello to the sheep. We pass many on the pathless moorland, and they bleat back at us. Margaret begins to sing a song and John joins in, their lullaby drowned out by the chattering burn as we head down the shadowy hill to home. It is boggy underfoot, but Mother will have our shoes dry by the fire, ready for the return in the morning.
Thanks very much, Helen. Really nicely read there, thank you. Yeah, this is really resonant as well. I thought that the use of the sort of the colloquialisms here peppered throughout the ha and the bends, quite familiar terms really, that really sort of came from that landscape and from I imagine your experience of being in that landscape and listening to the way people speak and interact with this path. And I also really liked that image at the beginning of the second stanza when the sun is seen to be playing peekaboo behind the mountains, and then these bright orange rays turn the sky to fire and brimstone. I thought that was kind of a really interesting way, I guess, of viewing the landscape from the children's point of view. It felt quite playful and felt like the kind of image that one child might tell another, look at it's fire and brimstone. It really felt like you'd inhabited their perspective for that. Yeah, and it just sounds like a really lovely route actually, and I like that kind of feeling of the lullaby coming in towards the end and it being this repetitive motion of walking through landscape that we've sort of alluded to a few times now already. And yeah, someone's just put in the chat box that there's another lovely illustration, and I'm sure you've seen it, Helen, but yeah, there's lovely figures of the children carrying the lamb there. So that brings us, I believe, to the end of the first set of readings. I'm gonna, whilst we maybe wait 30 seconds, I found the quote that I mentioned earlier, and it comes from this wonderful collection that Art Events published a few years ago called Towards Re-Enchantment, Place and Its Meanings. And my confusion was that it's an essay by Richard Mabey. And he's talking about Norfolk, and he mentions another East Anglian writer, Ronald Blythe, and the quote is, Ronald Blythe wonders, quote, whether landscape enters the blood with the milk. So for anyone who heard me mention that earlier, it's Ronald Blythe, and it's in this wonderful little book by Art Events. It's a really interesting series of writers reflecting on places around the UK, so really big names like Ian Sinclair and Jay Griffiths, Robin Robertson, Kathleen Jamie, people like that. It's a really, really nice anthology. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed that first tranche of readings as much as I did. It was really wonderful to hear those poets. And in a minute, I'm going to go through the second set and introduce everybody in much the same way before getting on to the juicy bit, I guess, which is announcing the winners. I'm going to sort of unashamedly put a link to my collection in the chat, so you can go on Walk, Listen, Create and find a link to my collection Corrigenda for Costifying Town. And I'm just going to read one more poem from that now. So this poem is called Davy, and it's based on my great-grandfather's Davy lamp. So this was a tool, a miner's safety lamp that he took down a couple of collieries in the northeast in the sort of the mid 20th century. And for anyone sort of unfamiliar with the sort of grueling hardship of mining, this would really have been a very small, I have actually got it downstairs, I should have brought it up, as a sort of yay-high little steel and brass plated lamp that would have escorted men and boys underground and been their only sort of source of light. For the northeast and other areas, no doubt South Wales, Marcel, you'll be aware of this. Mining is in some ways quite problematic because it's sort of become an event horizon, and kind of mythologically it can be quite problematic because there's can be this view that you know, we should just bring it back, and wasn't it better when we all had jobs? But actually, of course, we can't continue to burn carbon and have exploitative labour practices. But nonetheless, it retains a huge sort of potent symbolism in the region. And this is what I engage with a lot in my work, as someone who clearly has never had to do this kind of hard manual labour, at once to be sort of proud of that heritage, but to hold it at arm's length and to try and think of it in new ways, to use it as a kind of guiding light through the future. So that's what this poem is about. It's called Davy. I took great-granda Nick's Davy lamp down to the tool shed, set it on the chest freezer, glugged paraffin into the base, sparked the flue and waited for ignition, hoping to enter his life and times, to return and hold them as models. I'd imagine the bowels beneath Bolden and Westow, fire damp sky of worlds more rich despite their autarky. I have heard that the absence of flames makes the shivering castaway pine more cruelly, sends him hallucinating snakes of naphtha and kerosene. All along he knew the slag heaps and wagon chairs, the weight of the earth above, and the distances still to go. Ornamental now, Davy's become a puzzle, and Nicholas is muzzled. Get out of this sink estate, Nick. Buff your boots, recite the Lord's Prayer, slick back your hair and hold your chest high. You're out of the shaft now, air is crisp. Put the lamp on the mantle and inhale. Breathe without thinking of breathing. Thanks so much, everybody. It's lovely to be able to participate in a small way to this fantastic event, and it's really nice to see so many different faces as well, and to get to know everybody else's work. It's always a really rewarding experience here in such a fantastic array of different backgrounds and experiences. So we move on to the second set of readings. Okay, so Jan Howcroft lives in Essex. She started writing when she retired. Her work has been shortlisted in several national writing competitions. So over to Jan then, thank you.
Okay, thanks. This piece was inspired by a walk in Epping Forest, and the bird that's mentioned set the tone for the piece. A deep intake of breath. I'm going to do the circular, he says, late afternoon. You want to come? The most he's spoken to you in a week. He waits outside for you to put on boots and pull an olive jacket over jeans. You lock the door. The forest breathes earth and decomposition. At first, the track is narrow, lined with brambles, but soon widens to a gravel path between the trees. Hornbeams, coppice beech, all leafless now. Last night, he smelled of soap, the soap you never buy. You need to ask him why, but can't. Instead, you stop to prod at fungi on a fallen trunk. Behind him, you can breathe more easily. A spaniel runs towards you, nose to ground, and slows to sniff your hand. He wags his tail, then zigzags off. What if you're wrong? A family passes on bikes. The tiny girl behind is travelling in a cart. He'll deny it. You know he will. Almost home. You can see his two-tone jacket where the path winds round the wood piles. He's waiting for you by a patch of downy feathers. What happened here? You ask rhetorically. He points. A wood pigeon. One of its wings is splayed out, and in the place its head should be, there's nothing, just a pool of blood. The only colour in the dying light. My God, you say. It's cold now, but neither of you moves. He looks at you. Before he speaks, you hear a deep intake of breath.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Jan. I thought this was a sort of a masterclass in the unsaid, or the kind of the gaps, saying more than, you know, what lots of writing could. It's that perfect example, I think, was the soap. Last night he smelled of soap, a soap you never buy. And just leaving the sentence there to hang, and all of the ramifications of that were just so perfectly encapsulated, and you built up this quite eerie and sinister tone throughout, but actually kind of paradoxically towards the end, in the most sort of violent moment, it kind of became a lot more tender and embraced a different kind of future, I thought. So there was a hopefulness to this piece as well, which I thought was really wonderful, but just so pared down and so sort of spare in its detail. It was really wonderful to hear that. So thanks a lot for that lovely reading, Jan. So in it, Amado works in video, site-specific installation, sound and performance. She is interested in interdisciplinary collaboration and participation, and is an affiliate of Deep Listening in the UK. So over to Inish.
Thank you. Okay, so basically this poem came to me because first of all, I do live in different places, especially of late. And it seems that every time I go home, but then I ask, where is my home? You know, I am Portuguese. I have lived in the UK for a long time. However, I spent the whole of the pandemic, or the quarantine, here in Portugal. And I have, in a way, not lost my connection to my own country, but certainly there was a big separation, and my new family was in England, and so on and so forth. And so I inquire, and writing this poem, I was inquiring further into actually what is home, and ultimately what is home if not the home within. So my poem goes like this. My home is far, far away. My home is a home in my memory. My home is composed of multiple homes. My home is nowhere and everywhere. My home is made up. My home is a series of stories. My home resides in my head and all the time in my heart. My home is a traveling home. My home is a continuous journey. My home is a path that I take. My home is made up of layers. My home is unraveling itself in each word I write. My home is the continuous thoughts that occur and never cease. My home is somewhere in a past, made up of other pasts. Walking home. My home is here. My home is my body. My home is a resonance. My home resonates in the word home. Walking home. Each time there are different vibrations, notes that vibrate and create a recreation of this temporary home. Walking home, receding into this shell made of the provisional, the ephemeral, impermanent, but continuously walking home.
Thank you so much for that wonderful reading, Ines. I love the line of home unraveling itself in each word I write. That sort of, it's a very pithy summary, I think, of what you've captured here, the elusive nature of home and how slippery and entangled it can be with other places and other selves and memory and myth and all these different things. It was a really, really nice list poem, I think, and the list poem itself is a really effective way of kind of kaleidoscope and all of these different things together. So thank you so much for being with us and making time to shuttle from one meeting to another to read with us today. That was wonderful. Okay, great. So Sue Dawes lives with her family in the wilds of Essex and writes crime, literary and speculative fiction. So let's hear from Sue. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so it's called Unpicking the Thread. Feet's hurt, you say. I bend down to lift you up and inhale your bubbled woolen warmth, the apple shampoo that winds through your knotted dark curls and the honeyed porridge crusting on your flushed cheek. The rainbow wellies were a mistake despite the mud trapped in the ridges, now 2 damp clay smears on the shoulders of my padded coat. Marmalade, your soft mittened hand brushes my neck as you point to our neighbour's cat, washing its ginger paws behind the frost-splattered window at the end of the street. It yawns, stretches like silk, and turns its back on us, tail erect. You tug at the reins of hair that escape my beanie as I stirrup your legs with my fingers. Giddy up, you say, hands knitting together around my head, 2 warm pads scrunched tight. Soon you'll be too big to carry, and the fabric of your childhood would be edged with bias, bound and knotted by embarrassment. You'll think carefully before allowing me to touch your hand or walk within a stitch of you. Nay, I say, pawing the pavement with my boot. Your breath mists and lace my cheek as giggles snip through the icy air. So the inspiration, sorry, I'm not very good at reading. So the inspiration for that came from a workshop, actually, the Walking Home workshop with Elle Rhodes. And she threw a lot of words at us while we were busy writing. And quite a few of them ended up in that poem, in that flash fiction. So not footsore, which was the one that actually started it off. But yeah, so I had to change that word because it didn't quite fit into the piece. But yes, it was definitely inspired by that workshop. She's great, actually. I thoroughly recommend going to any that she puts on.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Sue, and so confidently read. Actually, I'm not sure why you were so hesitant. It was a wonderful read, and so thanks so much. Quite a lot of similarity to some of the other pieces we've heard about walking with memory and walking through the past and using walking as a tool or method to sort of evoke past selves and past lives. I thought that the idea of kind of soon you'll be too big to carry and the fabric of your childhood will be edged with bias. I just thought that was a really potent image actually edged with bias, this sort of loss of innocence, and what happens when the wider world exerts its forces on our small people. But yeah, it was really evocative and really kind of intimate still as well. I really felt the kind of the intimacy of this piece. It's really nice to hear it, and like I say, very nicely read. And yeah, the clay smears on the coat. Yeah, that was a very powerful image too, as well, wasn't it? It felt very visceral. Okay, so thank you, Sue. We now have Megan Hicks with her poem Transfer. So I'll just give Megan's bio. Megan Hicks is a slow walker and an observer of the ordinary and the odd in the urban landscape. She writes, but only slowly, and is an adjunct fellow at Western Sydney University. And on Instagram, you can follow her at GritPics. So, Megan Hicks, please.
Thanks very much, Jake. The poem that I wrote is based on an incident, one of those incidents that stick in your mind, you know, sort of stands out from the ordinary and the everyday. When I was walking home one day, now before I begin, I need to acknowledge that where I live and where this incident took place is on the land of the Gadigal Wangal people. The poem's called Transfer. Work's over, heading home. Out of the corner of my eye, someone running, dodging between the lanes of traffic. Screech! Thump! A cluster already gathering around something on the road. I turn back. The driver's sitting front steps of the bank, ignored. I sit too, my arms around him. He says he's phoned a friend. I stay. Home late, I notice I am glistening. Tiny shards of glass embedded in my clothes.
Wow, we get again talk about a powerful ending, so compelling there, Megan. Sort of like a flash fiction piece, really, that kind of everything happening so suddenly and so quickly, and for relatively few words, there's a sort of a whole kind of a whole narrative, but so much more than that contained in this short piece. I just thought it was really, really powerful and almost cinematic. I thought it felt like a really cinematic piece, kind of told in a flash fiction / prose poem. It's really, really wonderful. And the glistening shards at the end, yeah, I thought that was just so powerful. But also the image of the driver sitting front steps of the bank, ignored. Yeah, that also really resonated, I think, and just the way that these experiences of the urban kind of accidents, I guess, happening like this, and the way you've captured that, and we get a sense of it from your bio that this is something that you're more interested in more widely. That was wonderful. So thanks a lot, Megan, and thanks again for taking the time to join us in the middle of the night.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is a great experience for me. Thank you, and thank Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay, so we're heading back to Cheryl Markowski now for the chalk walk. And I've already introduced Cheryl, so unless she wants to say anything about this, I'll just hand over to her and we can hear from the chalk walk.
Thanks very much, Jake. And I'm sorry, you guys are going to get fed up of me, but I'll go away after this. This story came about because we walk on a path very near to our village of Sherrington here in Wiltshire. We're in the Wylie Valley, and we call it the Chalk Walk because there's a lot of chalkland here. And I'm just sort of reenacting this walk, and we encounter fields. There's a Roman mound, there's cows. Sometimes we get bulls and sheep. And I'm writing this story because our son Jack, when he was young, he used to go along this route with us. And there's also a reference to a plaque in our local church in Sherrington, and it's dedicated to the saints Damien and Cosmas. And there's a plaque inside the church that commemorates the life of another little boy who died far too young several decades ago. So it's looking at him as well. The Chalk Walk, OS Explorer Map 143, age 6, up Sutton Hill, where you come off your bike and drama queens sprain your arm. Examined by the retired doctor in the village, a gynecologist, so maybe not all that helpful. Age 7, atop the Roman mound, you imagine rusty armored corpses of spear-carrying soldiers buried beneath, like extras piling up at Shakespeare's Globe. We say nothing, don't want to disappoint. Age 8, along the farm track, you chuck sticky weed, fusing it to our wet dog jumpers. Schadenfreude beckons when you brush stinging nettles, a good deal of whimpering. Age 9, by the Bull in Field sign, you point horn fingers behind wool fended ears, pretend stamping and snorting. You describe how the picador stabs at the bull's neck, the animal's first major loss of blood. Age 10, beside the watercress beds, you exhume wild garlic, Ramson's a popular homeopathic ingredient, on the banks. Not to be confused with autumn crocus, you warn, which can lead to serious poisoning. Age 11, in the graveyard, we spring fetch elderflower, aromatic hints of hay and honey to make cordial, can reduce pain and swelling, can stop bleeding. We pray to St. Cosmas and St. Damien, the church's patron saints of healing. We hope for light, but walk in gloom. You walk a thin line between something and something else, the end of your walk home. Nota bene, users noting errors or omissions are requested to mark them on the map and forward them to the survey division. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks again, Cheryl. It's wonderful to hear that second piece. And I love that kind of wry, tongue-in-cheek end in there, and the kind of this slightly self-deprecating, self-aware, you know, the use of the OS map, which is, as we like to think, as being sort of an accurate guide, but of course is subject to dating and you know, being ripped up or lost or just being wrong. So I really thought that was funny. I also really liked in this piece how you used the age. So we go from 6 to 11, and that kind of marshals the repetitive nature of this walk. And I think there's something special about coming back to a walk over many years. And I got that feeling there of this being this recurrent walk, which sort of changes over time, but also cross-refers to older figures in the landscape and mythology and stuff. So thank you so much for that, Cheryl. Yeah, exactly. So a wonderful blend of the personal and the historical. Absolutely agree with that. So we've got one more piece now, and which is good. I think we're pretty much on time, and that is from David Thompson, and it's an afternoon walk in the Jura, and it's a poem. So I'm just going to introduce David. David Thompson worked for the United Nations in New York and Bangkok before moving to WHO in Geneva. Now retired, he lives in Frome, Somerset. So over to David, please.
I've unmuted, but I noticed that my camera is flicking on and off a bit. So if it collapses, then don't send for the fire brigade. I'll just carry on reading the way we always do in the Women's Institute. The poem is about the place I used to live before I left Geneva. The Jura Mountains are quite a high ridge of Alps that more or less parallel the north side of Lake Geneva, going west to east. And I used to live halfway up on the south side, so wonderful views of Mont Blanc and Lake Geneva and all the valleys around. But the forests were full of wildlife. There were wonderful things there to see and do, and I was walking there all the time. So I'll just read the poem, which is, I think actually it's not really about one experience, it's more a distillation of, goodness knows, dozens, scores of walks in this wonderful sort of paradise of nature. I called it An Afternoon Walk in the Jura. Straight up from the track by the church, we skirt the cowsheds onto steep pastures, a rutted path into the pines and hazels, the Teesel highland ploughed by wild boars' snouts. On the ridge, a chalet shades the cold spring. Chain-sawn log benches arc round a ring of fire-charred stones. Inside, cow stalls, a ladder to the loft, the perfume of hay. Timbers settle quietly as the sun leaves the valley. The chalet rests, the day's heat drawing resins from the cut wood. New night scents fuse into the rising mountain breeze. We might not come again before the snow clamps the high ground. Our hands brush, explore, capture the shape of our summer faces. Then, bright in the flattened sun, we head down the forest track, back to the softer green below. The wind sends late-day signals as we drop. A hare, emboldened, halts to stare. Deer browse by the scrub fringe. A fox coughs. Owl's wings stir. We scramble down the hairpins, stride the easy final stretch, reach home, washed in golden light. That's it.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, David. Such an evocative trip there into and around that mountain landscape. Such powerful imagery. Really felt kind of that I was being brought on a journey of discovery, and much like other pieces, a journey of discovery made more rich for having been repeated so many times and accumulated experience of being in these landscapes. I really liked the perfume of the hay in the loft there. That just, I could really imagine that just through that description. And also in the penultimate stanza, the snow was described, I think, as clamping onto the fell side, which was just a really surprising way of describing that condition, actually. So it was a really, really powerful piece, and as I say, kind of brought to life by the repetition, I thought. So thanks so much for that, David. We've reached the end of the readings now, and we're over to the announcement of the prizes. I believe that Andrew is going to say a few words before that.
Fantastic! Thank you very much to all the readers. That was really fabulous. But most importantly, thank you, Jake, for some really lovely comments, and having taken the time and effort to read all the pieces and really think through about them and share your words of wisdom. I also want to thank Lydia and her fellow writer in residence, who's not on the call, who is Claudia Zaeski, for both their contributions through the year, but especially Lydia for being a judge and for coming along today and explaining a little bit about the theme. And a big shout out again to the judges who were, as I say, Anita Roy, Kerry Andrews and Simon Piasecki, as well as Lydia. And a thank you to Chris Beswick and Alban Lowe. And in a minute, I'm going to pass the baton over back to Jake. But first, we're going to invite John Best to say a few words. And John's from the Milton Keynes Literary Festival, where working with them, what we've done is we've placed the stories. We've geolocated them somewhere in Milton Keynes. I'll get John to tell you where it is. But you can actually listen to those stories remotely off the Echoes app, and I'll pop through the link in a moment. But just to say the prizes, okay, the runners-up and winners each receive artwork created by Alban Lowe, and the winners receive this extraordinary accolade, could be a heavy mantle, I don't know, of becoming writer in residence, which of course is a bit bizarre because we're kind of an online world. So you're probably going to reside exactly where you are right now, but we'll see what happens. And Jake will be doing the announcements, and we'll invite the winners to read their pieces again. That's if our audience are happy to stay on for a few minutes, because we've slipped over our 90 minutes. So I'm hoping that people will be happy to stay on till about 10 past the hour, and we'll go from there. But I'm going to hand over to John Best.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all the readers. I've really enjoyed today's readings. Thank you so much. But I don't need to be too miserable not to have the readings anymore, because I've got them, of course, sitting in the cloud over Milton Keynes. So thank you all for contributing your voices to the trail that Andrew has described. Milton Keynes, for those who don't know it, particularly those not based in the UK, is a new town that's barely 50 years old. And whilst some people mock it as being a very concrete place, that couldn't be further from the truth. It's the greenest in every sense, the greenest place in the UK in terms of towns. And our green spaces are run by an amazing charity called the Parks Trust, and they manage something around 2,000 hectares of Milton Keynes, and that's an awful lot of playing field size. And we have the most tremendous range of walks around Milton Keynes. So Milton Keynes Lit Fest, which I chair, has been going for 6 years, and we're wanting to move into the field of green writing and nature writing, which is what we've done online during this year. And we think that going forward, we will have a series of Echoes trails sitting over different parks in Milton Keynes, of which your readings are sitting over Great Linford Manor Park, which is the jewel in the Parks Trust's portfolio of parks. So anybody coming to Milton Keynes, do take some time to see the green part, rather than just come shopping or going to the theatre, or you can walk along the waterway. So that's the end of the travelogue. The main point was that I wanted to thank you all for your contributions. We think it's going really well. We had a bit of a Curate's Egg of a launch yesterday, we had a number of people out in a marquee at Great Linford Manor Park, and some of the local poets, because it's your readings together with 7 local readings from both some anthologies that LitFest produced in 2018 and 2020, and a separate competition that the Parks Trust ran this year exclusively around Great Linford, and we had 3 readings from those. So you and others are hanging over Milton Keynes. Come and listen to yourselves on the ground, please do. But in the meantime, thanks so much for being the pilot, which we hope will be replicated manyfold across our parks and walks and countryside in Milton Keynes. So with that barrage of thanks, I'd like to hand back to Andrew. Thanks very much.
Actually, handing back to Jake.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that, John. That sounds wonderful. Do get along. Okay, so it's the most exciting part of the event. I'm going to announce the runners-up first, obviously, and I'm going to do it as it's on my list in the order it's in, which is poetry first, followed by prose. So I'll announce the poetry runner-up, and that goes to Marcel Newbold for returning. A round of applause to Marcel there. Well done, Marcel. That's excellent piece. Thanks so much. Really, really terrific work. And in our prose category, as a runner-up, that should be a new thing, shouldn't it? As a runner-up, it's Helen Harradine for The Scholar's Path. So well done, Helen. So our poetry winner in the competition with the poem Of Blood and Water is Tony Horrocks. Congratulations, Tony. Over to you, Tony. Do you want to say a few words and read the poem?
Okay, thank you very much. Gosh, I'm very honoured. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I have to find it. Of Blood and Water. For 70 years, 5 English places he had called home. But within his hybrid blood flowed secret rivers, Vltava, Elba, Oder, Morava, names he could barely pronounce, but ingested in childhood, those Sundays his father and uncle met, and goose-fat dumplings with sweet vinegared cabbage evoked their birth language. And he, an uncomprehending ghost, sensed their sadness, wondering if they wanted to return home to Prague in search of their mother, lost in the Holocaust. They never did. Years later, he stepped off the train there, walking to find the city's new Jewish cemetery and the fallen family gravestone hidden beneath sprawling ivy. He fetched water, let it flow like a river washing clean a century's legacy of dirt. As he whispered Vltava, Elba, Oder, Morava, until his name at last appeared. Thank you.
Congratulations, Tony, for that wonderful reading. As I said, first time round, I think it's a really powerful evocation of memory and personal family history. It reminded me of the wonderful book by Maria Stepanova, In Memory of Memory, which a few people might be familiar with. So yeah, it's a really powerful poem, and it was wonderful to hear it again. And I hope you enjoy your poetry residency in the next year. So finally, to the winner in the prose category. And with Walk of Life, it is Cheryl Markowski. So congratulations, Cheryl, very, very well done. I'm going to hand over to you and invite you to say a few words and to read your piece again. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. It's really exciting. And well, as I said earlier, I think this story's become even more resonant now with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. So I'm really pleased. And I just want to thank all of you and to thank the judges. And it's very exciting. I've never been in residence before, so it's great. Anyway, Walk of Life. Freed woman, walk to pines and panic in the lower Silesian forest. Cross your heart and the Kavisa River, your pudgy arms wrap round your father's tree trunk neck. Chiha, Jetko, hush, child. Pull through on pine seeds that catch on a breeze and spread far from the parent tree, full of vitamin B and surprisingly tasty when compared with the alternative, nothing. Must learn to walk before you run, he tells you. Forge a passport, forge a ticket, forge a new world life. Washerwoman, walk up the aisle to pines and possibility in the Rockies, across the ocean and the Crow's Nest Pass, your slender arms wrapped round your husband's branch line. Boil young male pine cones each spring. Add top of the cow's milk, and he won't mind the crunch on teeth, the crunch decision, the crunch in his heart. Worship the ground he walks on, he insists. Scrub and scrape and scratch. Coal, dirt, a living. Mad woman. Sleepwalk to pines and parenthood in wood decay fungi. Into the woods to bury 1, 2, 3 in coffin dark. Your aching arms round the cleaved babies. Peel raw bark from young twigs, unswaddling new growth, new wood, new tree ring. Excellent source of vitamin C when trying to survive. Crawl before you walk, you urge your new child. Face like a drying beet, born from pine needle tea. Walk home to the pines, the forests, the mountains. This is home. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cheryl. It's wonderful to hear that one again as well, and to bring out all the detail again for the second time. And that it's just such a fabulous story there. And it's I feel like you've done such justice to your great grandmother there. And again, I would really like to see how that one develops. So congratulations on your prize there. And to everybody for taking part today. It's been really beautiful hearing all of these different voices and different stories of walking home across 2 different forms, and to bring people together via the magic of Tinternet from around the world has been great. So thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me kind of compare and make some quick notes on people's pieces. It's been a fabulous event. So good luck to everybody as your writing progresses. And yeah, thanks again. It's been really great. Thank you.
Well, brilliant. Thanks, Jake. And we have overrun a little bit, so we won't keep anyone much longer. But just to say, good luck with your writing, everybody. You'll receive your artwork in the post probably the beginning of next week. Not tomorrow, but the week beyond. So a big thank you to everybody, and enjoy the rest of the weekend.